Under a pale greying sky, the train rolled into Schlangwing station. The tracks were covered with snow which was tightly packed and unclean where the wind had blown it against the platform. I was the first to step outside, and I took a long breath of air that was noticeably sharper than usual. Next to me, Eli was smiling, despite the fact that his nose was growing pink as he dragged his duffel bag by its strap. Our shuttle ride began at Schlangwing and ended at Ramsau am Deichstein, perched precariously on the mountainside. As night fell over the ridge, the sharply pitched roofs covered in snow, the wooden balconies piled high with chopped firewood, and the narrow windows that emitted a faint orange glow gave every building an older appearance than it actually had. A handful of cloaked people moved purposefully down the main street, but they didn't hang around for long. There was a subtle aroma of smoke and pine in the air, and the sound of our every footfall reverberated through the building. When we got to the guest house, Jonas and Marcus were already there. I was surprised by how tall they were. They stood near the stairs, with his black coat zipped all the way up to his throat and his thick beanie pulled low. Jonas looked fierce. As he leaned against the wooden railing, smoked a cigarette and placed his rucksack at his feet, Marcus appeared to be more at ease. It was weird to meet them for the first time. There was still an air of strangeness about meeting face to face after nearly a year of online communication. It becomes almost surreal to see your online acquaintances in real life once you become accustomed to that screen buffer. With a joke already brewing, Eli rushed forward to shake their hands. Their laughter was more courteous than sincere, but I could still tell they were laughing. It was obvious that we were the outcasts, they were the active sort, whereas we preferred to stay inside in an effort to blend in. I concealed my hands deep into my coat pockets. We made ourselves at home in the inn. I took off my gloves while seated on the bed, my fingertips numb and unresponsive. I hadn't experienced such a frigid spell before. With the maps in hand, Marcus spread one out on the table in the middle of us, and we all hunkered down to study it. They chose a route that encircled Hohe Dachstein's base, winding through steep alpine forest before splitting off onto more secluded ridgelines. We were told it would take a few days, but it was nothing they couldn't manage. Before supper, we made sure all of our gear was okay. All of us had the essentials. Stuff like insulated coats, thermal undergarments, unnecessary crampons, lightweight, sleeping bags, collapsible cookware, freeze-dried food, snow goggles, and little fire-starting kits. We all had knives on us, small functional blades for tasks like wood shaving, rope cutting, and food preparation. Nothing fancy. Mine was small enough to fit in my pack's side pocket, and I taped part of the handle to it so that it would be easier to find with a flashlight. On that particular evening, we strolled through the serene village and paused at a little eatery nestled between a bakery and a church. It was cozy inside, quite different from what one would expect from the outside. The quantities appeared to be plenty for men twice our size, and the dish was substantial and gravy-rich. The natives were silent much of the time and spoke with a sharp, abrupt accent when they did talk. Although they didn't actively seek out hostility, they also didn't seem to embrace it. The second their gaze strayed from us, we knew they would forget about us. Nonetheless, it was irrelevant. They weren't being impolite as far as we could tell. Here that was simply the way things were. The following day we were to go. I went through every step of packing, charging, checking, and sorting. We were prepared, that is, until we realized we weren't. A brisk morning hit, and no amount of layering helped relieve the stiff cold that hung around my neck. The sky outside the guest house window appeared to be a light shade of blue, interrupted only by a few scarcely moving cirrus clouds. After a quick meal, we gathered in the front narrow gravel lot to load up our packs. After checking the time, Marcus nodded formally to indicate the start of anything. As I adjusted my pack straps, I cast an eye across at Eli, who appeared unusually chuffed for someone who hadn't ventured beyond a handful of urban parks on foot. As we made our way through the village on foot, the snow crunched under our boots, providing a slight challenge without impeding our progress. A decrepit wooden pole and a frostbitten map enclosed in fogged plastic indicated the trailhead, which was located just beyond the line of spruce trees on the town's edge. They made a steady clicking sound as their poles brushed over the icy trail, because Eli and I were constantly pausing to take pictures. We were significantly behind. At regular intervals he would halt to utter a foolish remark about leaning against the trees or feigning combat with imagined bears. Despite my repeated warnings to conserve power, he persisted in doing it. We were surrounded by thicker woodland as we ascended. The breeze remained motionless. Snow that appeared older than the season caused branches to droop. The snow was starting to pile up, and I couldn't help but notice. When we left the village, it didn't appear to be that thick, but now that we're up here, it encircles our ankles and even higher at places. In response to Marcus's phone call, checking that we were maintaining our pace, I silently gave him the thumbs up. I resisted, acknowledging how rapidly my calves began to hurt, or how the cold was piercing my gloves. Next to the right of the trail, we noticed a corroded metal sign attached to a pine tree. At the point where the metal had bent outward from the faceplate, snow had formed a crust around its perimeter. It wasn't reflective at all, but the fact that it didn't blend in with the wood markings we'd been following made it stand out. Before anybody else, Marcus got off the trail and shoveled snow with his gloved hand. From behind it, the rust-stained crimson letters protruded. We stood there for a moment due to the heavy weather. Above, the sky stayed perfectly clear. Someone neglected to take it down after the last tourist season, according to Jonas, who chuckled briefly. As Eli took out his phone to snap a picture, he nodded in agreement and explained that it would make for a perfect inside joke at a later date. We were almost 2 weeks behind schedule. Travel plans were altered. Other parts of the world saw erratic weather. According to Marcus, most paths at this elevation don't receive much use at this time of year, so it's not too strange that someone forgot to remove this. After passing the sign, the path gently descended before gradually ascending once more in the direction of a faraway row of trees. Beyond the forest, snow-covered rock protruded, and above it the sky outlined the mountain's pale peak. We disregarded the sign and proceeded onward. We were hoping for an exciting vacation, so we figured we might as well do the foolish thing because it seemed like a shortcut. After what felt like an eternity on foot, Eli finally slowed down next to me and gestured towards the ground in front of us. I squinted against the glare and glanced in the direction he indicated. Beside the sloping section of trail where the trees began to thin, there was a pair of tracks that softly curved to the left in the snow. Neither the wind nor the falling snow had yet rounded off the edges, so the indentations were clean. It seemed like boots, maybe not quite as big as Jonas's, but deeper than mine based on the pattern. As they deviated from the main track, they traversed the slope and vanished into a denser section of forest. Even before we uttered a word, Marcus was making his way toward them. With a nod to himself, he reached down and pressed 2 fingers into the closest print. After removing his glove, he raised his hand and announced that someone had recently come through, most likely today. As they climbed up, Jonas tracked the train's path with his gaze. They appeared to be moving northwest, possibly in the direction of that outer ridge. We shared a look with Eli. I was thrilled. The deserted path made it seem like we were exploring a desolate wasteland with every step we took. We were kind of expecting not to see many hikers since we came here in the off-season, but we still weren't surprised when we found out it wasn't. Anyone else could have been out here if you saw tracks, even if it was a stranger. We could hardly wait to break the ice, meet interesting individuals and hear their experiences. With a smile, Eli suggested that we make an effort to catch up. Meeting someone who was familiar with these routes would be great, he remarked. Even though Eli and I were already experiencing leg pain, I agreed with him. I had a sneaking suspicion that he simply wanted a break from keeping up with Marcus and Jonas, who appeared to be in no hurry. There were no visible trail signs as the path gently climbed. Layers of snow that appeared older than the one we had been trudging through earlier covered the uneven ground, partially buried in the snow branches, split at the midpoint, seemingly due to weight rather than age. Even though we were climbing the trees here, were closer together, and light streamed through a canopy that appeared lower than previously. With his gaze fixed downward, Marcus continued ahead, pausing every so often to verify the print spacing. He was followed closely by Jonas, as Eli and I cautiously made our way through areas where the snow melted into cracks under tangled roots. We slowed down, even the air had transformed. It wasn't until then that I realized the wind had died down. I did not feel a breeze caressing my ears. Occasionally I raised my eyes to survey the woodland, hoping to catch a glimpse of something moving among the trees or to hear voices calling from afar. Completely non-existent, I assumed whoever passed through this place had been a pro. There was no evidence of retracing steps or checking twice in the footprints. Eli finally mumbled something about how we ought to have caught up by this point. He had a point. The prints appeared to be recent when we discovered them. They ought to have pointed us in the direction of a person, or at least indicated that the individual had halted. But that was all that had transpired. But we never once suggested going back. A secret desire to meet someone had developed. Keeping our focus on the trails, we continued on foot, our boots driving into snow that had been packed down by a single traveler before us. It took another hour for the ascent to start to take its toll on us. Slightly, but noticeably, the slope had become steeper. The air had thinned, and each breath started to carry a rough edge. Eli was the first to speak up. He paused and leaned forward, palms resting on his knees, his breath condensing in rushes as he gazed over at Jonas. "We need a break," he replied. Not quite out of breath, but near. Jonas didn't argue. He dumped his bag into the snow and ripped off his gloves to stretch his fingers red from cold. Marcus, who had been ahead by a few meters, glanced around and raised an eyebrow. His look made it clear that he was determined not to stop. As if seeking confirmation, he glanced down along the trail again before returning his gaze to me. The designs appeared to be very new. There was still no melting or filling of the snow around them. Our pursuers couldn't have been more than a few hundred yards away. "We will continue," I assured him, "but just for a short while. We would circle back to this spot and regroup if we didn't see anything more imminently." While already reaching into his pack for a protein snack, Eli glanced up and waved lazily. Jonas, in his low voice, mentioned something about lighting a little fire as they kept waiting. With every stride, the jungle became more dense. More closely spaced trees with inward extending branches formed a canopy that dappled light and cast a muted grey over everything. Several trees drooped in the center, as if burdened by something heavier than snow, while the trunks of others twisted and snapped in an abnormal way, with bark peeling off in strips. Branches were scattered across the trail, not broken by the wind or storm, but split at sharp angles. Some were partially buried in snow as if they had fallen vertically. I would have thought a monkey was climbing around here, since the branches were bending and breaking beneath its weight, if I hadn't known better. The prints ceased thereafter. The two of us noticed it simultaneously. Marcus decelerated and eventually stopped completely. I followed him forward and gazed at the snowy landscape in front of us. Deep indentations in a single line, evenly spaced from heel to toe, had formed the trail's obvious pattern up until now. Nothing thereafter. That was the end of the track. The tracks were neat and tidy, leading into unspoilt snow. Using my glove, I knelt down and rubbed the powder. The exterior was resistant. There were no subterranean depressions. My eyes darted from side to side. There was no movement in the snow as it extended in all directions. Marcus raised his voice and provided a robust justification. It seems like the area got some snow earlier. Perhaps they had been obscured by a minor snowfall that seemed reasonable. After giving us a quick look back, Marcus turned and began to make his way back. I remained silent as I followed. Our surroundings were a verdant, creaking forest. A branch snapped off in the distance. By the time we returned, the woodland had begun to lose its luster. The forest floor was now a dirty mirror of light. The area was engulfed in shadows, and the smoke billowed in an irregular pattern from the fire. In a small steel pan with the handle wrapped in fabric to prevent cold fingers, Jonas knelt beside the fire, turning something over, with his gloved hands encircling a plastic cup. Eli perched on a fallen tree stump, steam rising from the contents of his mixture. The tents were already pitched. At a distance of a few meters from the fire, they stood, their ropes wound around buried stones stuck into the compacted snow. With us, we stepped into the glow of the fire, and Eli arched an eyebrow. "Is that all?" Dropping his pack against a tent, Marcus shook his head in disapproval. "The tracks just stopped," he exclaimed. What appeared to be snow encased them. All parties were satisfied by the explanation. Jonas divided the food among us and gave each of us a bowl, some stew that had been desiccated, which he had rehydrated with snowmelt. The texture was unsatisfactory, and the saltiness was too much. However, we harbored no grumblings. The heat eased the tightness that had built up in my gut, which I hadn't noticed was there. Marcus had packed warm powdered cider to boost morale, and we sipped from metal cups. The flavor brought back a memory of a field trip I went on when I was a kid, but I can't place it. Eli began to relate a narrative, but as he began to lose track of his own progress, the story became even funny. Jonas almost lost his drink when he snorted through his nose. A smile spread across my face. It began to snow as we were chatting. It was hardly a heavy fall. The snow fell gently in spirals, glinting in the firelight as it fell, and then it settled silently about us. The trees were engulfed in shifting shadows, caused by the orange and yellow flickering of the flames. Then suddenly the subject was changed. "Please be quiet." Amidst the giggling, the words pierced through. Our movements came to a halt. For an instant, the sound of the snow melting on the pan's edge was the sole audible sound. I then made out the sound, weak yet distinct, a satisfying crunch. The snow fell at gradual intervals, compacting under its own weight. It wasn't a rumble, but it was close enough to constitute a threat. Around they went. Following the path of the trees, the noise faded away before reappearing from a different direction. Standing, Marcus bowed. His stance was rigid, and his eyes squinted as he turned to face the source of the noise. "Oh my!" he yelled out. Some object shifted. A thumping scuffle pushed through the snow and cracked it open, strong enough to reverberate off the nearby trees. The rhythm is 4 beats per minute, just long enough to detect mass. I caught a glimpse of the shadow slipping between the trunks. Then it vanished. Someone remained motionless for a few seconds. There was silence in the jungle. Jonas claimed it was wolves. Effortlessly he left it as it was. Almost as a joke, Eli loosened his jaw and then shut it again. After glancing at me, he turned to the forest line. Following that, we made the decision to go to bed. No one dared to say it out, but with this kind of presence, we really considered abandoning this hike. We could take an alternative route, and it didn't sound enjoyable to be off-trail among wolves. My boots crunched as I moved my weight onto the half-frozen ground when I stepped out of the tent in the morning, and I beheld them printed materials. There were many of them surrounding the tent. Every step has been meticulously documented by the snow. Some of them were pressing up on the nylon to the point where I could make out the mid-stride shift of the paws. A low, looping arc encircled them. A few went straight for the tent but quickly pivoted back. Some of them went off into the forest before coming back to the rest. With a deep breath, Marcus walked up to be by my side. Subsequently, Jonas emerged, his eyes narrowing due to the early light. After that, Eli trailed after and whistled with his teeth as he stared at the floor. "Here we go," we gathered quietly. Our hands moved faster than our coordination, causing the tents to come down in a flash. We got going, and after 2 hours of strolling, we came clean about what we were afraid to say. The initial path we had pursued, the footprints we had followed, had vanished. They had been wiped out by the snowstorm. There was not even a hint of an imprint left. No way could one turn back now. After adjusting the strap over his chest, Marcus turned his head to face north. Sunlight guides us, down we go. We were all at a loss for what to do. We strolled along. We continued our day in quiet contemplation. Every step became further submerged in the snow as it had previously. We had to pause more frequently than previously because the slope dropped in spots and then rose unexpectedly. Despite the sunshine streaming through the trees and pale shafts, it didn't feel warm at all. At this point, everyone ceased talking. For some reason, Eli's silence for more than an hour felt out of place. On occasion, Jonas glanced in our rearview mirror. Presumably, trying to project an air of self-assuredness, Marcus proceeded forward with his shoulders squared. I started to see motion. Something was moving between the trees when I first noticed a flicker outside my area of vision. I sensed something was there, even if I couldn't identify it precisely. Further along, the form reappeared as a mass that glided from one trunk to another, before as soon as my gaze landed on it, it froze. It was also noticed by the others. I could sense it. Eli drew nearer to me than before, his gaze fixed ahead, though he occasionally darted to look to either side as if no one was looking. While silently massaging the nape of his neck, he parted his lips once and then shut them again. Nobody looked back. Our boots dragged and we kept on silently. We could see the wolves were closing up on us, but we couldn't run away. Their pursuit was too much for us to bear. Jonas happened to come to a halt first. He knelt down on one knee after his legs gave out on an uneven area of snow. He remained motionless, his shoulders swaying from side to side without uttering a word of complaint or profanity. Without any thought, the rest of us surrounded him. Our resources had been depleted. Just a little opening between some trees that had been smoothed off a few meters away was the clearing where we came to a halt. Even though it was small, it sufficed. In the absence of any prior consent, Marcus dropped his bag and got to work unpacking the tent. At this meeting, no one spoke. The strain was on all of us. We were all required to remain in one tent, so we didn't disperse. No one gathered firewood, and we didn't even cook. We munch our way through the vacuum-sealed meal packs without reheating a single one. With each bite, my teeth hurt from the food's density and coldness. Eli distributed a canteen containing a mixture of sugar pills and melting snow. With hardly enough space to move about, 4 bodies are jammed into one little room. Our boots stayed there, and our bags were spread out along the sides. A knife was always on hand for every one of us. As the wind rustled through the trees, I could feel the fabric walls shifting ever so slightly, and my belief that something lurked beyond them grew. I awoke sometime during the wee hours of the morning. The uncomfortable position I had been in while lying down and the sharply chilly air within the tent were both contributing factors to my aching body. Mist formed from my breath, and it gradually dissipated just over my head. I stayed motionless. My ears perked up. I had been startled awake. Someone was outdoors. The crunch of paws on snow was audible to me. Here we go again. Calm collected. Once again, it whirled around us. Its or their sniffing was audible to me. Then I cocked my head. Eli had woken up. Everyone else was as well. Their expressionless features matched their wide eyes. Holding his knife just beneath the sleeping bag, Marcus had one hand on the handle. He could no longer feel his knuckles. A rip of fabric sounded in the tent, and we all turned our heads at the same time. Threads began to separate as the fabric was stretched taut, beginning slowly and gradually. Expanding, a line formed around the corner. The chill crept inside. A form protruded from the opening. Then the head of the wolf came into view. Its eyes reflected a muted liquid yellow light that filtered through the snow. A snout dipped out just before it pounced. I beheld its fangs. My shoulder was suddenly weighted down, and a wave of intense heat swept over my collarbone as they tightened down. Within my own ears I could hear my cry. Disarray ensued when the tent fell apart. It was a stampede. Flailing arms blades flashed. Knife just scraped through thick skin and fur as I stabbed through the darkness with my free hand. The wolf hissed and twitched. With a sidestep, Jonas struck it. Marcus sliced at its ribs with his knife, worried. Eli jabbed at the victim's shoulder. Even though they were shallow, the cuts came quickly and violently. In an effort to retreat, the wolf contorted its body, its jaw relaxed. As its legs kicked, my arm finally gave out from all the stabbing I did. A pool of blood formed in the sleeping bag's folds and seeped into my shirt as it stained the tent floor. Then the beast collapsed, its jaws drooped as it grew slack. I failed to detect any signs of life. All of us trembling from adrenaline, we shifted our focus to a sound that hadn't been audible throughout the altercation, but persisted the whole time as we awaited another of their entries into the tent, raging, beating, and eventually whinnying when it was silent again. Beneath the tent, we remained silent. Here we lingered. For a few seconds after the wolf grew quiet, nobody did anything. Each breath I took was shorter than the one before it. On the left side of my jacket there was blood. It was hot where it had spread, and cool elsewhere. My grip on the knife was shaky, slippery, and heavy. With the blade still raised in his fist, Jonas's arm quivered by my side. He waited for another sound, but nothing came, even though his eyes were fixed on the tent wall. Prior to that, Eli leaned forward. Carefully tracing the edge of the tent's ripped wall, his fingertips tentatively extended. With threads that hadn't ripped completely, the flap gently peeled open. He took a quick peep inside, first with his narrow gaze, before using both hands to expand the opening. He remained silent. Marcus dipped his head to peer. Next up was Jonas. I remained motionless, steadying myself by clutching the tent pole with one hand and pressing down on my shoulder with the other. I trailed behind them as they ventured out into the snow. Our camp's perimeter had been ploughed under. At the outside of the camp there was a solitary branch that had not been present when we arrived. Wolves might be seen lying all over the snow. Some had been hurled against trees, while others were in twisted heaps, their limbs twisted at angles that betrayed the presence of brutal force. There were clumps of ice and blood in the fur. Among them, one lay jawless, and another had its ribcage sliced open. The front legs of a third were totally absent. Their corpses encircled our tent in all directions. Huge footprints, some deeper than others, and creating irregular patterns, had been imprinted into the crust of the snow surrounding them. They resembled humans in general outline, but their dimensions and spacing were completely illogical. Some stood shoulder to shoulder, while others were several meters distant. Near the clearing's edge, Jonas stood. Marcus slowly circled one of the bigger bodies as he paced. Standing there with his arms crossed and the knife dangling from his hand, Eli did nothing. I carefully removed my jacket as I sat on the compacted snow. I felt a throbbing soreness under my shirt. The skin was pierced 3 times by the teeth's penetration. As I knelt beside him, Jonas unlocked the medical kit. Before bandaging the bite with gauze and securing it with clean fabric strips, he poured water over it. Marcus silently stood watch. The presence of human tracks nearby was completely unnoticed by us. We were out of power and energy to inquire more. Our steps have taken on a more somber tone once more. Our tent was abandoned at that spot. We wandered aimlessly for what seemed like hours. Something seemed familiar to us. Looking forward into the snow, we could make out a little set of footprints that followed our route, personable with pointed corners, identical to the previous ones. Recognizing hope was unnecessary. The hope of seeing someone ahead of us carried us along in a common current, a path to pursue, somewhere to put one's faith. We proceeded to follow the prints as they led us through the forest. Neither of us even thought to inquire as to the purpose of the other's presence or how the footprints might have materialized out of thin air. A path widened before curving slightly ahead. We probably walked for at least 15 minutes. Following a straight line, the prints persisted. Next, they came to a halt. The conclusion arrived suddenly, as it had previously. We thought about what to do next and stopped for a while. The first person to notice it was Marcus. With his fingers tense and his arms slowly raised, he gestured upward. We stared into his eyes. Something was watching us from a few meters away between the top branches of a pine tree. Surrounded by thick cords of frozen muscle and entirely frostbitten, its shoulders are rounded and its body is stretched unnaturally wide through the chest. There were rips and pits all over its body. A few spots were completely absent, while others appeared blistered or burned. A few patches of coarse fur remained on its body, but the majority had either been rubbed off or never grown. On either side of its skull protruded a set of long antlers that appeared to be veins of dark frost and covered with moss. It locked eyes with me, unmoving and broad. They were verdant. Underneath it dangled a pair of short, pallid legs that were undeniably human. Their diminutive size made them sway slightly in the wind, as if they had been ripped off and nailed onto something else, unfit to hold such a heavy object. Its weight caused the branches to squeak. Later on, they snapped. The object fell. A sharp thump echoed through the air as it hit the ground, sending a ring of snow spiraling upwards. After absorbing the impact of the fall, the limbs flexed. It turned its weight to face us. With 2 arms it extended, seized Marcus by the waist, and hoisted him into the air. There was no time for him to yell. The monster pounded him into the snow multiple times before throwing him into the trunk of the tree. At the base, his body collapsed and fractured. Our own instincts to stay alive propelled us as we fled in separate ways. Prior to my brain catching up, my legs had already moved. With a heavy dusting of snow and an acrid aroma of blood, the wind whipped past my face. I failed to signal or inquire as to the whereabouts of the others. My sleeves were shredded by branches. The landscape became hazy. Trees went by in a flash. Once I slipped and fell into a snowbank. Luckily, I was able to get out of there unscathed. Because of the injury, my shoulder ached, and I felt sick to my stomach with every sudden movement. In the end, I gave in. The sound of the object's impact with the floor was so loud that it made it impossible for me to breathe. The hills started to fall at some point. Underfoot, the snow became thicker, and the pattern of opening trees became familiar. Along the edge of the clearing, I could make out the splintered tree trunk, and to my right I could see a streak of disturbed snow. The initial fire's scorch traces on the tree were instantly recognizable to me. I had gone back to the original camp. The tent was partially intact. Along the entrance, traces of frozen blood ran. As time and cold had worn down the wolves' features, their corpses had started to sink into the snow. There was no change. I crouched down next to the tent and made my way inside. The battle had twisted the sleeping bag, and it lay in a heap. Grasping the one I had previously utilized, I drew it around my body. Due to the ripped lining, the zipper was jammed and barely worked. I buried my head in the cloth, assumed the coziest position I could find, and did my best to regulate my breathing. The woodland outside was still. As soon as my muscles stopped responding, I hid in the shadows. I initially detected the low hum of an engine and the crunch of packed snow. Because I didn't know if it was real or not, I stood motionless at first. Then I perceived voices being fluent in German or Austrian. One man and one woman. Moving closer, a second engine follows. Taking my gaze off the ripped tent, I poked my head out of my sleeping bag. On foot, 2 people drew near. Mountain patrol patches were sewn into the coats. A snowmobile lies in wait behind them, its tracks obscured by a whirlwind of powder close to the forest's border. Kneeling by the tent, one of them leaned back and made a radio call. The second one stooped down and came over to me. He asked me my name and whether I was alone in a soothing conversational tone. Nodding, I gave the signal. If I was hurt, he wanted to know. Indicate my shoulder, I said. Words came out of my mouth, but they were sharp and raspy. I began to elaborate. My companions, the monster, and its deeds were all detailed for him in my account. His expression remained unchanged while he listened. He covered my back with a blanket, put his hand on my wrist, and ordered me to remain motionless. I would discover their purpose for visiting later on. We were dealing with members of a pack of wolves that were under surveillance. Conservation officials could monitor their whereabouts and actions thanks to the implant trackers they were carrying. The data shows that all of the signals went off at the same time, precisely 30 minutes apart. No mass failure of such like had ever happened before. Poachers, they thought, they sent out patrols and I was located by them. Somehow, I was assigned a lawyer who instructed me to speak very little, cooperate, and use clipped English. A further piece would be published. Friday is the sentencing date for the tourist accused of unlawfully killing wolves. According to them, my recollection had been clouded by trauma. They postulated that hallucinations were caused by hypothermia and blood loss. A stressful experience caused a crack to appear in my judgment. The rules of discourse were rigid. The national and EU policies safeguarded the wolves in this area. Prison sentence was imposed for the murder of even one. My body was discovered in the middle of a camp full of dead bodies. My account was completely disregarded. It was 20 months.